Yes. Okay, so good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for making your time here, even though we rescheduled the meeting. And then we hope that those who will be watching recording later will also gain something from today's Stats Forum. So we are from Psi Chis, and we are very honored to have Victor as our guest today. So upon students' request towards how statistics is very, I would say, a little bit torturing, but at the same time quite fulfilling. So we are here actually to throw out questions from students on the floor, and we have accumulated questions for I think around 1 month of the period each to get some questions from the students who are really suffering from statistics. So before we start, is there anything that Dr. Victor wanted to say to the floor?
Okay, so I understand this is more like a forum, you can ask your questions, etc. But what I prepared a very, very short outline as well. Things I'm going to cover. So hopefully the things that I cover will already answer some of the questions, right? And then if you still have questions after on, I'll be more than happy. So YC will ask whatever questions that is collected. The audience here online can also ask questions if they want to. And then I will just take a look at the questions and I'll answer them then here. All right?
Okay. So I think, do you want to start off with what you have prepared first?
Yeah, so I'm going to just start off really quickly about what I prepared so far. It's not going to be very long. It's just 3 main points, right? One, why stats matters, right? So why are we doing stats? So if you don't know already, actually in health, we train all of you in statistics at a much higher level than any other uni in Malaysia, right? So we are the only uni where you actually have to go through 5 different stats courses, 105, 107, 2, and then 3, 4, 5, right? Why do we do that? It's not because we like to torture you, but because stats actually matters a lot, right? In most other unis, even in etc., they only have 2 courses, only 1. Right? So you can imagine you go for only 1 stats class, then you go for a thesis. You're not ready at all, right? So in health itself, we really make sure that when you go to your thesis, you actually are prepared for it. So why stats matters? Number 2, I'm going to talk to you about OLS, the ordinary least squares family, right? I believe it's important to understand OLS because if you don't understand OLS, sometimes you'll be like, which stats test do I use? When you understand OLS, you realize the question actually doesn't really matter at all, and I'll explain to you why, right? And then lastly, I will address stats versus design. So most students, I feel they confuse design of the experiment and design of the studies with stats. They are not the same thing, and I'll show you why as well. Okay. Now, before I go, I'm going to just clarify there are a few caveats. Number 1, what will this will not cover, right? So I don't want you to come in here and then watch recording and then go like, okay, this will give me the answer to all my 201 and 202 questions. No, it will not, right? So this is not a stats tutorial. So I'm not going to show you which buttons to press on your SPSS or your JASP. You need to learn that yourself, right? I don't have the time to show you that. I won't be telling you which stats test to use for your assignment. So if you're going to ask me, Victor, I'm doing my 107 now, which stats test do I use? I'll be like, you got to go and figure out yourself, right? I'm not here to give you the answers to that, right? Number 3, it's not meant to be used as an academic support. So I don't want you to go for this, take this recording, and then go and find your stats lecturer and go, yeah, but Victor says this, why you teaching me something else? What I'm showing you today is it's the foundation of statistics, right? But the way we teach you in 105, 107 can be different because when we structure 105, 107, 201, 202, we are trying to make sure you understand step by step. What I'm showing you is the macro perspective, right? So the way we teach you can be very different, and it doesn't mean that your lecturers are wrong. You understand? You're structured in a way that helps you to understand it better. Okay, so 3 main things. Right. Let's start with why stats matters first. So why do we care? Right? Why do we bother about this? Because statistics actually it's important for us in a few ways. Number 1, it helps us as students, as psychology students, to see if our conclusions are real, and more importantly, if they're applicable. Right? So there are 2 things here. Real means valid. Applicable means does it really matter in the first place? You can be valid but not applicable. You understand? So you have to have both. You have to be both valid and applicable in a sense. So p-value and confidence intervals, those are the 2 things that you most of you will learn, right? P-value is a very strategic yes or no. More than 0.05, no, yes. Less than 0.05, yes, right? But confidence interval is a bit different. In fact, for most statistics nowadays, we are moving away from p-values and moving more towards CIs, confidence intervals. Why? Because confidence intervals gives us a more realistic view of the results itself, right? It's a range of reality. We are saying if we do this, if we repeat this same test 100 times, will the results fall within these confidence intervals? And the confidence intervals also gives us the applicability of it, right? Because if our confidence intervals is very large, as in it can be between 1 to 100, that's our CI. then your results don't really matter anymore because 1 and 100 is very different. But if your CI, let's say between 100 and 90, only that short, narrow range, and you always fall within that same CI, then your results are important. They're applicable, you understand, right? Cohen's D is for effect size. Effect size is also measuring applicability, meaning you have this result, your hypothesis is true, right? But how many people in the population will it be true for? That's your effect size, right? So if your effect size is very small, it means, yes, you found significant results, but you only applies to 5 people out of 1 million. Then there's no point, right? You only change 5 people's lives. But if you affects 800,000 out of 1 million people, then you can say, okay, these are big findings. These are things that can affect the whole population. That's the effect size, you understand? So that's one thing. Number two, it allows psychologists to make decisions, right? Not just you students, but us practicing psychologists, we can make informed decisions, right? It allows our research to be published. And interestingly, for most students, what you don't realize is this, most of you think, oh, stats 105, 107, 122, just get past it, you're done. What you don't realize is if you do your stats well and you know your stats well, that statistics skill, that statistics knowledge is actually the most marketable skill you will have. When you graduate from psychology, your employers might not ask you which electives you took, but they will be very interested in how well you score in your stats. Because the kind of statistical knowledge, the data wrangling that you're doing, right, is very applicable for most companies. And the reason why your seniors can earn so much as data scientists, data analysts, because they understand these statistics. So I want to encourage all of you, don't see statistics as, oh, I didn't get passes to do my thesis and I'm done. No. If you master it well enough, it is one of the most employable traits that you can have in the future as well. And that's why help our uni, our department of psychology, our students are the most employable in the whole country. Why? Because they are trained. We torture you to the point where by the time you graduate, you're like a damn expert in this already, right? So that's the whole point. So focus on stats, not just to pass your thesis. It is an employable trait you need to remember. So that's why stats matters, right? Now, I'm going to talk a bit about the OLS family. So what is OLS? OLS stands for ordinary least squares, right? They are the common, I call them the common family of statistics. Why? Because most of the stats tests you will use is OLS. It's in the same family, right? So most commonly used method for estimating relationships between variables. So IVDV, right? Predictor 1, predictor 2, etc. That's the most common method, right? You see, OLS works. How does it work? So ordinary least squares works by minimizing the sum of squares of these errors. So, for example, you have this line of best fit now. I'm sorry, but the slide is very blur. But you can only see the line. But if you look at your slides on the call and stuff, you can actually see that there are dots, there are data points across the graph and stuff, right? OLS finds the specific line, this line here, right? Finds that specific line where the total square error is as small as possible, or what you will learn in class, we call it the line of best fit. The line that is closest and goes through the most data points possible. That's a line of best fit. So in this case, your R squared is 0.81. It's a very, very strong line of best fit, right? So OLS basically is this. If you ever see a graph with a line like that, that is OLS already. You understand? So that's the basic fundamental assumption of what ordinary least squares is. We're trying to find the line of best fit, the line that minimizes the square error between each data point in the graph. So why do I say everything is OLS? Because a majority of the stats tests you will do is actually OLS. So you can see here, t-test, line of best fit. Simple linear regression, line of best fit. Multiple linear regression, line of best fit. ANOVAs, line of best fit. Right? What does that mean? It simply means that these tests are actually giving you the exact same results. So see, some students will think, oh, t-test is different from linear regression. Multiple regression is different from ANOVA. The secret behind it is actually it's all the same. Right? In fact, if you do a multiple regression, and then you got to F the ANOVA table, right? And then you convert the multiple regression variables into a categorical, you do the ANOVA, you will get the exact same numbers. Because it's the exact same test, there's no difference, right? So the one thing I want you to understand is when you understand that these are all the same family of tests, then it doesn't matter what kind of stats test I'm using. It only matters what kind of design you have that you use the proper stats test. But the results are actually the same. They're actually, and I will show you examples later on, right? So all these tests, because they're the same family, they have the same assumptions, right? Number one, you assume a linear means straight, right? This one, linear, you assume a linear relationship, right? Number two, you have a normal distribution, you have equivariance, what we call homoscedasticity, right? And you have independent observations of your data points, right? So these are very, very common assumptions. It is the same for ANOVAs. That's why it is the same for multiple regressions, same for everything, because same OLS family. Okay, so if you're ever wondering in stats test, you're like, what are the assumptions for ANOVA and regression? The same thing, right? It's like there's no special assumption for regression that's not in ANOVA because they're the same thing. They measure the exact same thing. You understand? So very, very similar assumptions. And like I say, in essence, all these tests gives you the exact same results, right? So the question here is, are there any other tests besides these four and part of the OLS family? So there are a few tests that are not part of the OLS family. For example, logistic regression, right? Logistic regression is when your DV is binary. Your DV is categorical. So your DV is either yes or no. Your DV is he alive or dead? Is he cheating or not cheating? That's your DV, right? That's your logistic regression already, right? Non-parametric test is any test that you have a non-normal distribution, right? You violated some assumptions, you're doing a non-parametric. All non-parametric are not part of OS, right? So you have the Mann-Whitney, which is a non-parametric version of the t-test. You have the Kruskal-Wallis, which is the non-parametric of the ANOVA, and you have the Wilcoxon-Sign rank, which is a non-parametric of the pair samples t-test, right? And then you have the chi-square, it's also not part of the OLS, right? You have both IB and DB are categorical, and you have PLS. PLS stands for partial least squares. So ordinary least squares, partial least squares. Partial least squares is, it's not new per se, it's quite old already, but it's new for most researchers because most researchers are still in the OLS family. PLS is a different kind of stats family altogether. The strength of the PLS is that you can have very, very small sample sizes, you can have no independent errors, and you can still run the stats, right? That's why people call PLS the silver bullet, right? Because PLS can basically analyze anything, right? It's almost like a cheat code in a sense, right? Not many programs can run a PLS. There's one program called the Smart PLS, that one can run PLS, right? But SPSS, JSP, I don't know. Actually, wait, JSP I think can. It can run PLS now. I think I can't recall. I have a JSP. I can't recall when I used it. But SPSS is entirely OLS family, right? So that's the main difference, right? So why do we run different tests, right? So we run different tests. Like I said, like if it's all the same test, why bother running different? Why don't we just do MR reduction for everything? Why do ANOVA, whatever? To be fair, you can actually use a multiple regression for everything. You never need to learn an ANOVA in the first place, right? But we teach you different things because there are two different motives for different tests. First one is interpretation. So how do you want to interpret the data, right? How do you want to interpret? What conclusions do you want to draw from the data itself? For example, is it more or less? Group A more, group B less, group B more, group A less? In which case, a t-test of ANOVA is clearer because it shows you more or less. Is there a difference? Right? Or does it show more if? So if one goes up, the other one goes up. Now that one is more regression already. Right? So more or less t-test ANOVAs, more if, it's more regression, correlation, etc. Right? Linear regression. Right? Difference is also post-hoc testing. ANOVAs, the good thing is you can do a post-hoc. Right? Post-hoc meaning you can test so there's a difference between groups. Which group is higher, which group is lower? A, B, and C. Is B higher, A second, C third? ANOVAs gives you that as well. So it's a lot easier to see the post-hoc. A multiple regression can do that, but it's additional steps. And ANOVA is a lot easier to see, right? And the second thing is intention. So intention means, what are you trying to test for? Right? You want to test, again, is one better than the other? Is one more or less? Is there a relationship? What direction is it? What is your intention? Can determine what kind of stats tests you use. But I want you to understand, ultimately, the fundamental assumption, like I said earlier, is they are all the same. They give the same results. Just that one is easier to see based on your intention. If my intention is to see predictive relationships, then a regression is going to be a lot easier to see than a t-test. You understand? So that's the biggest reason for why we have different tests in the first place, right? Now, stats versus design. So must we do different stats tests based on the design of our experiment? Answer, yes and no. Why yes? Because again, you focus back on my previous point of intention, right? You want to see differences between groups. The ANOVA allows us to see it easier, right? And allows for post-hoc testing, right? The regression doesn't do that. No, because again, like I said, fundamentally, they're all the same, right? They're all part of the OLS. It doesn't really matter. From a p-value point of view, it doesn't matter. You will get the same p-values. You'll get the same F statistic, the same p-values, it's all the same. There's confidence intervals, all of it will be the same. Right? So yes and no, depending on what you want to do, what you want to achieve in the first place. Okay. So I'm going to talk a bit more about stats and design, specifically about moderators and mediators, because most students seem to get confused about this. Right? What's the difference? Mediators explain the process. Right? So mediators answer the question of how and why. So for example, let's just say right now, right? for, let's say, me and Jack, for example, right? He's in front of me right now, right? I'm talking and he's listening to me, right? How is Jack able to listen to me? There has to be a mediator between me and Jack that allows my voice to go into his ears. And the mediator here is air, right? Suddenly it's a science lecture all of a sudden, right? But that's how sound transmits, right? Sound transmits through air, and then air vibrations go into his ear, and then he hears my voice. You understand? So that's the mediator. If there's no air, he can't hear me. If it's a vacuum, he can't hear me. So air is the mediator. Air explains how me and Jack can hear each other, the process itself. The moderator is the speaker. The moderator is the mic, right? If there's no mic, he can hear me, but a lot softer. If there is a mic, he can hear me a lot clearer. The moderator amplifies or weakens that relationship. That's the easiest way to explain mediator and moderator. You understand? Right? So don't confuse the two. They are not the same thing. They are not the same thing. They are actually fundamentally very different things. Right? How you will run it in a mediation analysis in SPSS is a process macro. In JSP, same thing. The exact same macro is there as well. Moderation is an interaction term. But I think the latest process macro can also do a moderation, right? It actually creates the interaction term for you, which you are damn lucky. At my point of, during my day, we have to do it ourselves, have to calculate ourselves, we have to function, create new interaction terms by ourselves, right? SPSS, your one is like, this macro do it all for you, right? You're still complaining, what the hell, right? So easy for you, don't complain, right? Do it, stop complaining, right? For us, I sound like uncle now, but yeah, I mean, it's a lot easier right now for you. The process macro actually does both for you, okay? Now, a few more questions I want to address. Robust testing. So again, I know most students, when you write your reports, and I know because I see your reports, right? You will say, yeah, no, the sample size wasn't hit, distribution was not normal, but the OLS test is a robust test, so therefore we can do analysis, right? So what the heck is a robust test? What do we call it robust, and what is robustness? Here's the secret. But again, please don't quote me. Please don't go and put it in your thesis. Victor Go, right? Says this. No, please don't do this. You need to find a source yourself, right? But technically, the secret is this. All OLS tests, ANOVA, t-test, blah, 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 all OLS dummy tests are robust, provided one condition, provided your sample size is large enough, right? If you got a huge sample size, every test is robust, right? So ANOVAs, t-test, n more than 30, rule of thumb is robust. Regression, more than 100, rule of thumb is robust. Why? Why is it the sample size? Because of a factor, of a phenomenon called the central limit theorem, the CLT. So what is the central limit theorem? In simple English, a central limit theorem simply means the bigger your sample size, the distribution confirm normal one. Because if you get 10 people in this room, the 10 people who are in this room now, right, could be you are here because you are nerds. Because you are just statistical nerds, so you are here, you have nothing to do, you have free time, you want to come here and listen about stats, right? All the nerds in this classroom, right? But so you all are special. You're not normal. I'm not saying you are crazy, but you know, there's something wrong. There's something not normal about all of you to be here on a Friday afternoon. You could be like at home sleeping. Why are you here on a Friday afternoon, right? I'm happy you're here, don't get me wrong, but something is wrong, right? So that's non-normality. But if you get enough people, if you expand the sample size large enough, eventually you will get enough normal people. Eventually these nerds will be, your effect on the population will be a lot smaller because you got a lot of other people who are normal, and then your nerdness is diluted across the population. You understand? That's why the central limit theorem in simple English simply means if you got a big enough sample size, eventually it will look like a normal population. Because you get enough people to dilute the non-normal population. You understand? Right? So that's you talk about robustness, basically that's that, right? So central limit theorem, something to think about. That being said, I don't want to see in your reports, you don't go and like Victor said on the 13th of February 2026, Victor said sample size big enough, doesn't care about normal. That's not. Please don't do that. I don't want you write that you were going to fail your thesis and then you don't go and blame me, right? So that's that. Okay. So without further ado, let's just go into the question and answer so you can have time to actually ask your questions. I can answer them as well, right? Come.
Thank you so much, Victor, for the first section of sharing. Oh my God, so great. I think one of the biggest that I get from here is also about how all the stats are fundamentally similar. The mechanism is all same. But before we dive into the questions, I was thinking since we are all still fresh with whatever we have learned right now, I just wonder if the floor have any questions for now, according to what you listened just now. So I do think there's a lot to digest. Okay, I think I'll leave it to you guys to think about it while we go through the questions that we have already have beforehand. Okay.
Okay, one more thing. You just finished a session on EFA, right? With Farmer. Yeah. Okay, just to add on, EFA is not OLS. Right? So you don't understand, EFA is a factorial analysis, it's nothing to do with OLS. Right? So that's the another example of a non-OLS family, in a sense, right? Yes.
A random question. Okay, a random question. Is random forest regression also OLS?
It's a good question. Actually, I'm not really sure. I think it is. I think it borrows from the OLS, if I'm not wrong. I don't know. I'm not sure. I'm not really sure. Yeah, I find out. Let me find out.
Okay.
Yeah.
The question. Okay, so we'll get back to the question that we have here. So, maybe I'll go with something more general first before we dive into the very specific one. It's like, there are people who ask, what are some common mistakes that people make in data analysis and how do we avoid them?
I would say from my experience in guiding students, whether it's undergraduate or PhD, one of the more common mistakes students make in data analysis is that they forget to actually treat their data first. So most students, okay, I got data, that's it. I just run the analysis. Data treatment simply means you need to take care of your data beforehand, right? What does that mean? It means any data that's not complete, you remove. Either you remove or you replace, right? That's one thing. Second thing is you need to also check, hey, do you have outliers or not? Because your outlier can skew your entire result. For example, let's just say, so I'll give you an example of outliers and why it's so important. Let's just say you're running a research on kindergarten students, right? Kindy students and their IQ level. What you didn't realize was in your Kindy students population, there's one person who is the son of Albert Einstein, right? You didn't realize that. And that guy is a freaking genius, right? Because daddy's a genius, so he's a genius. Actually, not really. It's more mommy genius, daddy, then the kids become parental genes. Father apparently got very, very small impact on IQ. Yeah, it's more girls, right? So if you're smart, thank your mother, not your dad. Right, if you're smart, thank your mother. It's more girls than guys, right? Okay, so Marie Curie, Marie Curie's son is in your kindergarten class. He's a genius because Marie Curie is his mom, right? What does that mean? It simply means that if you don't treat his data, you don't take off his data, he's going to skew the entire class. His one score is going to make the entire class look like a genius. But for all you know, they're all idiots. Only one genius, only one. Right? But because of that one person you didn't take him out, the whole class looks like a genius now. So data treatment is very important. And this is where I see most students don't understand. They don't bother about outliers. They don't bother about invalid data. They don't bother about whatever. One other thing you can do that will be very impressive for your thesis, because we don't teach you that. So if you do it, your lecturers will be like, wow, so clever, right? Is what we call the CMB, a common method bias, right? So CMB simply means what? Means your method of collecting data itself was the reason why there's the problem. So for example, let's say I collect data using a very, very long questionnaire, right? The questionnaire is 300 questions long online, and it's super long, right? And because it's so long, people get bored. They do. After halfway, they're like, yeah, screw this, right? A for everything, right? The tool that I'm using, the questionnaire itself, has a problem already, right? So the CMB, the common method bias, actually analyzes whether or not there's actually a common method that is biasing your results, right? So I don't think we teach you that in 201 or 202, do we? It's in 311. Oh, wonderful. Is it? Oh, really? Okay, that's good. That's good. If you have even in 311, that's fantastic, right? But if you can, most students don't even check for it, right? So you should check for it, because ultimately your questionnaire could be a problem, right? So if you check for it, then at least you know, you can report whether or not there is a common method bias or not, right? The bad news is at your level, if there is a bias, you can't do anything about it, right? So at our level, right, at a higher level, if there's a bias, you have to recollect data, etc. For your thesis, you cannot, no time, you don't have. But you still test for it? Yes. Why? Because you will impress me, right? You can't change it, but the fact that you tested is a good thing. Like, yeah, at least this student is quite careful with their analysis, and that's how you score marks. So data treatment, I would say, is one of the more common mistakes. They just jump straight into analysis. They don't treat their data. They don't analyze and remove outliers, check for CMB, all those different things. You should do it like you should do it.
Inputs. Okay, I will go quick with the next one because there's a lot of questions here. So next question is, when choosing a sample size, what analysis should we use for experimental mediators and moderators, if not G-powered?
I would say this seems like a compound question because you are talking about sample size and then you have experimental mediators and moderators. I would say it doesn't really matter whether it's a mediator or a moderator, right? Sample size doesn't care about your stats design. Sample size cares about your variables, how many variables you have, which is actually linked. So question number 3 and question number 7 are quite linked together. So I'm going to address those two, for example, together, right? So sample size, how do you get it? Most people use G power, right? But the problem with G power is if G power bullshit you, also you won't know because you just put a number in there and then G power fits, right? But G power is generally quite valid, quite solid. But there are a few different rules of thumb we can use to actually analyze and compare with G power. First one I would say is by this researcher called Green. His name is literally Green, as in hijau, right? So it's funny, like in Malaysia, Macau hijau, like his papa didn't hijau, and it's like green, right? So Green, his rule of thumb is it should always be n is your sample size, n equals to 50 plus 8k. N equals to, is that market bank? No, n equals to 50 plus 8k, right? So what is k? K is your number of variables. So for example, let's say you got 3 variables. So 8k is what? 8 times 3 is 24 plus 50. 74, 50, right? So 24 plus 50 is 74. So your minimum sample size should be at least 74. 50 plus 8k. You understand? It's a rule of thumb by Green. Other rule of thumb, if you're doing an EFA, the ratio should be 10 to 1. So every variable you have in an EFA should be 10 participants per variable. That's why EFA can be big now. You need like 100, 200 people. Because if you have, let's say you got 10 questions, times 10, you need 100 already. Right? You got 20 questions, you do an EFA, you need 200 people because it's 10 to 1 ratio. Right? ANOVA is normally about 20 participants per group. Per condition, 20 participants, rule of thumb for ANOVAs. And then there's one more. We don't recommend this. I'm just telling you for information's sake, but please don't use it because it shows us you are lazy, right? There is a table called the Crashy and Morgan table. Crashy is spelled Krejcie, right? Crashy and Morgan is Morgan, Morgan, right? If you Google Crashy and Morgan, you will see they have a table. Most researchers quote or cite the Crashy and Morgan table. It gives you the minimum sample size based on your population size. So if population is 1 million, how many do you need? Population is 10,000, how many do you need? Gives you that kind of, it's not recommended because it's very lazy, one. Number two, Crashy and Morgan may not be completely applicable to all populations. So if you use the same table, you're not there. Yeah. So besides G power, there are a few different rules of thumb you can use them. Yeah.
Would you still recommend using G power for thesis level?
Yes. At thesis level, not even thesis, even honestly, even at master's level, even at PhD level, they still use G power. Because so it's nothing wrong with that, right? In fact, for my PhD, okay, I didn't use G power. I used Green and I use hair as in hair, HAIR. The researcher's name is actually called hair, right? But that one was more for CFA and EFA, so it's a different story altogether, right? For my PhD's regression, I use G power and I triangulate G power's recommended number with Green's 50 plus 8k, see if it's similar or not. Yeah, right? And then you take the higher number to oversample. Yeah.
Yes, thank you so much. Okay, next is how does bootstrapping work?
Okay, so bootstrapping. The term bootstrapping, people say, why bootstrap, right? So bootstrap is this lah, right? Your shoe, your strap lah, it's just your bootstrap, right? So bootstrapping comes from the idiom to carry yourself up from your bootstraps. What does that mean? It means you pull your own bootstrap to carry yourself up. It means it's your own effort. Nobody help you, right? So bootstrapping is the same kind of principle, right? When do we use? So let's talk about when and what it is. So what is it? Bootstrapping is a very simple way of maximizing your sample if you have a very small sample. When do we use it? We use it especially if we don't hit minimum sample size. If you hit min sample size, can you still bootstrap? You can. Nothing wrong with that. If you don't hit min sample size, you really freaking should bootstrap. Why? Because bootstrap gives you the maximum, it artificially expands your sample size, right? How does it do it? So it's a very, I can give you a real life example, but you need to imagine in your head, right? So let's just say I have you see this small pouch here, right? So let's say you have this small pouch, right? Now this pouch holds, let's say 10 marbles. So I have 10 marbles, guli, the small marbles, right? 10 marbles inside here, small marbles, right? And I want to test, this is my sample, I only have these 10, right? It's a very small sample, but I want to test what is the average weight of a marble. What is the average weight of an average marble, right? I only have 10. Is these 10 marbles in this small set here going to represent all the marbles in the world? Probably not, right? Because you only got 10, right? Marbles don't really differ a lot, but 10 is still very small for the whole world's marbles. What do I do with this? So how do I bootstrap? Bootstrapping simply means I take out one marble from this set, I weigh it, I put this marble back into the set again, right? And I take out another marble. So I replace, I take out. Now, could I pull out the same marble again? Possible, right? Because it's in the back, right? Doesn't matter. I'll just pull out anyway. I do this until I have pulled out 10 marbles. Then I have 10 marble weighing already. Then I get the average, right? And what do? I will repeat the exact same process again. So every repeat of the 10 marble process is one bootstrap. So if you bootstrap 1,000 times, it means I'm doing this same exercise. I take out 10, I weigh out 10, put it back in again. I take out again 1,000 times. So from 10 marbles, now I've got 10,000 marbles. I've got 10,000 weightage already. That's bootstrap. You understand? Bootstrap, the program actually takes your data right now and it randomly replaces and draws again over and over again. Well, I'm giving you this example of that, right? The marble condition. So you bootstrap 5,000 times, you're making your poor SPSS do that 5,000 times in a sense, right? In fact, when I did my PhD, we bootstrapped to 10K. So the bootstrapping itself took half an hour, right? We like bootstrap 10K, we analyzed 10K. I had a cup of coffee, Maggie me, come back, still not done yet, right? Because it takes time, right? It takes time to process the kind of data, right? But that's bootstrapping in a sense. When do you use it? When you have a small sample size, when you don't hit minimum sample size. Even if you do hit min sample size, you should still bootstrap anyway, just to make extra sure that your data really is representative in a sense. Yeah.
So on this question, can I ask, like, in what situation do we choose 1,000? In what situation we choose 5,000?
To be fair, right? If you bootstrap at 1,000, right, it doesn't matter anymore after that. If you bootstrap at 1,000, 5,000, 10,000, 1 million, you're going to get the same damn thing. Because 1,000 is really enough to actually get more or less the same thing anyway, right? People, why bootstrap to 10K? I 10K bootstrap because I wanted to be super extra sure. Because I only got 200 people. I only got 250 people in my PhD population. My sample was about 25,000. So I'm like, okay, you bootstrap to 10K, you match the sample size, 250 times 10K, you exceed the sample size already, right? So that's why I did it. But to be honest, if I start at 1,000, the result would have been the same, right? So you bootstrap to 1 million, it's just to impress somebody only. You got a very nerd boyfriend or girlfriend, you want to impress them, you bootstrap to 1 million. Here, it's 1 million, right? But otherwise, it means nothing. There's no difference. Yeah.
Okay, understood. Thank you. When is it better to use a non-parametric test, even if the assumptions for the parametric test are met?
I would say if your assumptions for the parametric are met, why are you even asking the question in the first place? There's nothing better to do in your life, right? If your assumptions are met already, just go with a parametric. There is no reason to still want to try a non-parametric. You only go for the question should be reversed. The question should be, can I still use a parametric if others are not met, right? Which is answer is yes, you can, but it's better to use the non-parametric, right? But if you already have assumptions that's met, right? Why are you making your life harder, right? That's like saying, I got a car. When is it right for me to walk to school? You got a car, use the car, right? What are you talking about? Why are you asking the question in the first place, right? It's nothing better to you. So that's my answer to you. Whoever asked that, I'm sorry if it's offensive, but yeah, that's my answer to you.
Okay. This question, I'm actually not very certain what you're asking, so just maybe it's my problem, which is how do I do mixed ANOVA calculation with pre-test and post-test between subjects? Oh, okay, now I understand. In experimental study.
This is the one thing that I will not answer, right? Because like I said, here, right, this is not a, right? What I will not cover is, this is not a stats. I'm not going to give you what you press, go and read your lecture slides, right? I can't guide you there. So this is one question that I probably won't answer for you. Right?
Just checking, right? I think based on what I understand is last time when we said that if we do pre-post, we'll do ANCOVA, right? And then ANCOVA is normally just one factor. And I mean like it's just one IV, it could be 3 levels. But if it's mixed ANOVA, meaning there will be two factor, and then when we ask our lecturer, can we do a pre-post and then do like a mixed ANCOVA or whatsoever, they will normally say you cannot or you will never learn. Except
So we teach ANCOVA, right?
yes.
We do teach ANCOVA. Do we teach a ANCOVA? No, we don't. Right. So ANCOVA, yes, we do teach ANCOVA, right? I would say okay, to be honest, I don't really understand the question. How do I do a mixed ANOVA calculation with pre and post test between subjects? Yeah, it's just a mixed ANOVA. What are you talking about? I don't understand the question. Maybe I'm stupid, I don't understand, but I understand.
Okay, I think the idea is literally if you have a pre-post, then one of your factor is just time. Is it? And then it's a mixed ANOVA.
Yeah.
Okay, so I don't know who asked this question, but if you ask this question, then you run a mixed ANOVA.
Because if it's pre-post, why is it mixed? Because you cannot control time. You are definitely going to be in the time condition already. You understand? Mixed means one is individual, one is within subjects now. If time is your within subject, how are you going to control time? Stop time for you? You know, I mean, everybody's going to go through the same kind of time. So if time is one of the factors, the way you operationally define time is one of the factors, then it's a mix already. You can't stop them. Sorry. Why is there an alarm? Okay, anyway, yeah.
Okay, sure. I hope that answer your question. And then next will be what is the difference between homogeneity of variances and homoscedasticity?
Same thing. Exact same thing. Homogeneity of variance is just Levene's, which is your t-test and ANOVA. Homoscedasticity is just your regression. It's the exact same thing. Right?
And then some tests robust to normality while some are not.
So we go back to the central limit theorem, right? The answer to this question is actually no. All OLS tests are robust to normality assumptions. You got a big enough sample size. So the question here is, in a sense, is a flawed question because if it's OLS and you got a big enough sample size, every test is robust to the normality assumptions, right? So it's also, yeah, right. That being said, yeah, if you're part of OLS, it will be robust.
So if it's not,
if let's say I would honestly, the central limit theorem actually applies not even to non-OLS as well, because eventually it's just a fact of life. You got a big enough sample, eventually you will get the normal population, right? So for example, okay, let's do a simple experiment. Malaysians, right? If you take everybody in health, or the most people in health who are Malaysians, right, students and staff alike, you can argue that maybe it's a health thing. They are not normal Malaysians. But if you expand it to Sunway, it's health plus Sunway. You can still argue, okay, maybe it's still not normal. Health plus Sunway plus Taylor's plus MMU plus APU plus UCSI plus UOC, you add all the unis together, you can still say, okay, maybe it's still not normal because they're all in uni. Then you add the high school, then you add the primary school, then you add the kindergarten. Eventually, you're going to add enough that every bloody Malaysian is in your group already. And then it becomes a normal Malaysian group, like you understand? So that's how the CLT works. Eventually, we got big enough sample size, eventually you'll be normal because everybody is accounted for it already. You understand?
Thank you so much. Next question is a bit lengthy. Try to as clear as possible. So I think this one is under the assumption for multiple linear regression.
Yeah.
So what does VIF and tolerance mean in the assumption of absence of multicollinearity in regression analysis? I think we answered that one first.
Okay. So long question. I will try to explain it in simple English so you understand, right? If I give you a whole stats answer, you'll just be even more confused, right? So let me just give you a very simple English answer. So let's talk tolerance first. What is tolerance? In simple English, tolerance is how much unique influence, unique information is brought to the table, is brought to the situation by that variable. So for example, that's why you only have tolerance and VIF in a multiple regression, right? Simple linear don't have one because you only got one variable, right? Multiple regression, you got two variables, two or more, right? So let's say, for example, okay, let's use me, it's the most neutral thing ever, so I don't offend anybody, right? Let's use Victor's happiness, right? So you want to predict my happiness, and you got two variables. One, how much food has he eaten so far, right? Which is something that brings me joy every single time, right? And how much sleep I've had over the period now. So these two things give me a lot of joy, right? So tolerance is asking how much unique impact on Victor's happiness does sleep have. You understand? So if your tolerance is very low, like less than 0.1, you are saying sleep and food for Victor's happiness is actually more or less the same thing now. You understand? So if your tolerance is very, very low, you basically have multicollinearity. You understand? So that's tolerance. Not strength. How much unique variance does sleep bring? If you realize tolerance is very low, then you are saying sleep and food impacts Victor's happiness in the exact same way. In which case, why are you measuring sleep and food? Just measure one. You understand?
Does that mean like how correlated?
So multicollinearity, remember we said you correlate sleep and whatever. Tolerance is basically the same thing. It does the same thing. It tells you how unique is each basic variable there. Right? That's why tolerance we want, in an ideal thing, we want tolerance to be very high. If tolerance, let's say 1.0 is the highest, right? If tolerance is 1.0, right? Then basically you're saying sleep and food are completely different in the way they impact Victor's happiness. Right? But in psychology, that's very rare. Right? It's very rare for variables to be completely independent of each other. We want that in a real world, in an ideal world, but it's impossible in psychology. Right? For example, let's say work. So I'm a workplace psychologist, right? So we analyze this in the workplace. Let's say we're going to talk about employee engagement, right? Employee engagement could be predicted by employee happiness, right? And how good their bosses are. But you see, how good your boss is can also impact on employee happiness. Right? So they are related in some way. Right? You understand? They are different variables, but they are linked in some way. And that's the issue in psychology. That's why our tolerance is never 1.0. Otherwise, we will never study anything. Right? So we have a tolerance of 0.2, some will say tolerance 0.1. But if your tolerance is very, very low, as in lower than 0.2, lower than 0.1, the question here is, do you have a multicollinearity issue? Are you measuring the exact same thing, basically? So that's tolerance. VIF is linked to tolerance. Right? So VIF, that's why you say tolerance and VIF, because say the same thing together, both together. Right? VIF is how much noise, how much variance of your results is inflated because of multicollinearity. So if you got very bad tolerance, you will have very bad VIF. Because they are linked together. If you got multicollinearity, you will have a very bad VIF score. It's just a fact of life. Right? So if you got good tolerance, you will naturally have good VIF. Because they are linked together. You understand? That's why you always ask for tolerance and VIF at the same time. Right? And then you got one more, you got Durbin-Watson, right? So it's your multi-regression, Watson. So Durbin-Watson is the exact same thing, one of the assumptions, the independence of errors. Every single data point is independent. The errors are independent of each other. If there is no independence, it means there is one, maybe a confounding variable that's impacting every single participant, which could be a CMP, could be noise, could be anything. So Durbin-Watson is your assumption of independence of errors. Right? Understand? So my answer is independent of her answer on the test itself. If my answer is somewhat linked to her answer, it means there's something linking both of us. Maybe while you're both doing the exam, there was a loud bang, and then we both got shocked. It affected us. Then our errors are no longer independent. You understand? Right? That's what Durbin-Watson.
If I'm not mistaken, for Durbin-Watson seems to be a test that sometimes the lecturer will say you only do it if you have multiple time points.
Yes, because no, you don't have to do it multiple time points. You can do a DW even without a multiple series test, right? Because you're still testing for independence of errors. But why is it particularly important in the time series? Because in the time series, you want to make sure that time itself is not the error. Yeah.
Okay, next question is quite common in our classes as well. What is the difference between zero, partial, and part correlation? And in linear regression, why do we refer to part correlation rather than other?
Okay, so I will assume when you say part correlation, you're saying semi-partial. So the zero partial, semi-partial correlation. So let's start with zero. Zero easiest one. Zero simply means no correlation. Right? Zero means there's no link whatsoever. A and B don't touch each other at all, right? Zero correlation. What is partial? Partial correlation is the question, the English question, the simple English question we are asking for partial correlation is what's left of the relationship? Right? That's the question we are asking. So for example, right? Let's assume we have three variables here. Let's think. Okay, I can give you a real life study that we've done with a client recently. Brand, right? Sorry, marketing and sales. How much marketing, how much sales? Right? Very simple. IV marketing, DB sales, right? Problem solved, right? Marketing, along marketing, do you have more sales? Right? Now, in the perfect world, is it only marketing and sales? There are other things as well, right? Could be brand reputation, right? If my reputation is horrible, you market me and my possible people still won't buy one, right? So that's a possible third variable that we're not measuring here, right? A partial correlation basically is saying when you try and control for, let's say, brand reputation, then your IV of marketing, right? If you can, what is the percentage of the sales is actually accounted for by your marketing after you control for, let's say, the brand reputation? You understand? Right? So that's partial correlation, right? Because it's not full, marketing is not fully, doesn't explain the whole variance in sales, right? It's partial. What is the partial? After you remove brand reputation, that's how much variance, how much influence marketing still have, right? Semi-partial is similar. You're asking, the question is, what is the unique contribution that comes from marketing alone? No other variable can claim that. Only marketing can claim that. What is a semi-partial correlation? This is why we report semi-partial. Because if you want to see the main effect, so-called the main predictive value of that variable, that gives you that variable's main influence, main impact.
Can I understand it as for partial correlation, the only thing that I control is the brand the brand of
brand awareness, reputation, right?
the brand reputation. But then when it comes to semi-partial, it means that not only the brand reputation, like other variables that is potential,
Yeah.
so we will
So you're isolating and you're saying uniquely just marketing itself. How much influence does marketing have?
partial correlation, it only controls for the branding, and then there might still be other.
In my situation, yes, in the case that I'm giving you, yeah. I will say that. Yeah. So you see, again, which brings me back to my first point, right? Can you imagine if you go in the future, you meet a client like me, and you're a consultant, and you don't understand this, and your client asks you, my marketing good enough or not? How to answer? You must know stats, man. You don't know stats, you cannot answer. You cannot answer, then what would people pay you? They wouldn't pay you anything. So stats itself gives you the ability, to be a consultant in the future. It's not just theories that you know, it's how do you process the data. Right? Yes.
Is uniquely marketing, but then do we also measure all the rest of the variables?
So in my case, you didn't. In my case, you didn't. Right? So if you report the semi-partial for my case, the brand whatever, you are just reporting based on the statistics, this is the unique contribution to sales that your marketing campaign has had. Right? So in my case, okay, my case is not a very good, not a very good case because my case you only have those three variables, right? But in my case, your partial and your semi-partial could be very similar. Right? Because you only have the three variables in a sense. I don't really answer the question. Sorry, what I say? Say that again. Yeah.
We actually control the rest of the variances because we need to control. You can say that's the
true. But again, it also depends on what, as a researcher, you think influences the relationship as well, right? So that's where your theory comes in, not just the stats. Because your theory guides what kind of covariates, what kind of other confounding variables that you need to control for. Could be age, could be whatever, with demographic factors. So it's always a combination of both. It's both the stats as well as your theory behind it. So what do you control for? What theory have you read? What is the theory? What does the literature tell you about the control for? Let me give again. Maybe after this we have a chat again. Let me think of a different situation to give you, so it's easier to see. Yeah.
get like a clearer answer or analogy, we'll try to
Yeah.
supplement in the video. Okay, next question is, what does the beta coefficient tells me?
I'm a bit concerned for whoever asked this question. Because if you're asking this question and you're in year 2, 201, 202, it's like, okay, maybe you've just completely slept through your 105 and 107. Let me ask the audience, what does the beta tell you? Okay, you cannot say power. Power is just a different thing altogether. What does the beta tell you? The beta coefficient tells you the strength of the relationship, right? Your beta is high, you have a strong relationship. Your beta is low, you have a low relationship. So I'm a bit concerned whoever's asking this question is like, it is quite a basic stats question that you shouldn't be confusing. Your beta gives you the strength of the relationship, right?
It's basically your y equals to mx
Yeah.
plus c, and then your gradient of the line
That's
tells you
beta.
the strength of a relationship.
Yeah.
And I think people also ask what is standardized beta coefficient. Basically, you standardize it into a value of 1, so you can tell that unless like
Yeah.
you will be disrupted by how you
operationally define
yeah.
your variables. Because how you define time, how you define happiness, how you define depression are different scales. So your beta cannot be compared to each other. If you standardize the beta, then you can compare across each other.
Okay. Next is, what is the difference between R and R squared?
Okay. Very simple. R is your correlation between the actual values that you observe, right? Basically, the question is, how well does my predictions actually match reality? What's the R? R squared is the amount of variance accounted for by your IV and your DV, right? R is how strong. R squared is how many percent of the pie did my variable explain. And then your adjusted R squared is how we stop you from cheating. Why? Because you can get a bigger R square by just adding in variables. You add nonsense variables, your R square will just go higher and higher and higher. The adjusted R square removes your non-related variables from the picture and gives you only the real variance of your variable itself. It's to avoid people from just hacking the data and just saying there's a super high R square, just add whatever they want in. Okay, so let me give you a real example, not a real analogy. Car, right? Cars. So engine is your variable, speed of the car. That's your outcome, right? So more powerful engine, faster car, right? What a bad mechanic will do is he will say, oh, you need a good engine, you need a good spoiler, you need a better headlight, you need a whatever. That's him adding in variables that says your car go faster, right? If you add all those things, naturally, you say, yeah, no, you can't go faster because of all these things. The adjusted R square removes all those unrelated stuff and just points out your engine how fast. How many percentage of the car speed is actually came from your engine, in a sense. Okay.
Next question drives a little bit back to history, which is how did early researchers come up with all this statistical analysis? Do they just
That's an interesting question. My answer is I don't know. Do I look old enough to the history of stats? I don't know. I think people got bored, I guess. Right? Last time got no TV, no TikTok, no Xiaohongshu, so they decided to just do stats. Right? And then they came out with the formula, and then just some other IT programmer got bored, took the formula, put it into a program. I don't know. You ask me, I don't know. I have no answer to that, right?
Okay, sure. It's stats forum, it's not history forum, right? So next question is, how do we actually know? Okay, I think it also relates back, so we have a lot of trust in all this.
Okay, so this is why in I think in your 105 or 107, we still introduce to you the fundamental calculations. We don't just tell you here's the button to press on SPSS. We tell you what's the equations like, right? How do you know the equations are reliable? Because it's mathematics, right? 1 + 1 is 2. How do I know it's true? Because it's a mathematical proof, right? How are you going to argue the proof? That's why it's called a proof, right? So reliability is baked into stats because if the underlying what's that? What's that? The equation. Thank you very much. If the underlying equation is mathematical, It's mathematical, right? The only thing that can make it non-reliable is you as a researcher did something wrong, right? So you use a non-reliable test, you use a non-valid test, then your results cannot be trusted. But if your results are, if you do the correct things, your reliability, your convex alpha, whatever is all very high, your reliability is all very good, right? And you do the test and you do that using the same equations, your results will be trustworthy. So you don't question the math. The math is just the math, right? You question the math, then there's no point in doing any stats whatsoever, right? Because it's a mathematical proof, right? So that's, I hope that answers your question.
Okay, good question also. All right, next question is, so, okay, the question asks, do we use SPSS or RStudio? Maybe I can add on or JSP when it comes to doing this. Is like
Okay.
it's more preferred.
So three things. If you talk about pure computing power, right? Pure, the shit you can do. Sorry, I should be cursing. Sorry. You talk about the things that you can do, right? R is the most flexible, right? R is basically a programming language, right? It's a platform for programming. You can do almost anything, right? So R is a lot more flexible. But the problem in R is that you need to know coding. You don't know how to write code. R just looks like gibberish to you, right? So SPSS is the more brain dead kind of program. Right? And I'm sorry if you're struggling with SPSS and you're like, how brain dead, but I don't know how to do it, right? I don't mean to insult you in any way, right? But SPSS is the more straightforward. You just click a button, right? Button, just click. JSP is the middle ground. JSP is built on R, right? In fact, JSP is actually built on R. The platform is actually built on R. Even if you go JSP, you can use the button view, or you can actually switch to code view, and you type R code into JSP to run analysis there. It's built on the R platform. Do you know? Yeah, I didn't know. I couldn't read up, right? So JSP is the middle ground. It has the flexibility of R if you know how to code. If you don't know how to code, it's okay. They still give you the SPSS dumbed down version of clicking buttons, right? So don't feel bad if you don't know, right? Personally, for me, I use JSP a lot, but if it's easy for me, if it's already, the function is already there, then I don't need to type the code. Just click the button. It's the same question as just now. You go, oh, how I walk, right? Same thing, right? Just because I use JSP doesn't mean, I'm the purist, I must do coding. We call that stupid, right? If you already know that the buttons are there, then you just use the buttons, right? Don't complicate life in that sense. So I hope that answers the question. JSPR, SPSS. JSP is the nice middle ground, I would say.
Interesting. Maybe consider JSP for a thesis. And then, okay, building upon this question, there are people who ask, is there any tips and tricks to fully utilizing the JSP software?
Okay. So the reason why I use JSP a lot, and also just update, because in case you didn't realize, as of this year itself, the uni will no longer support SPSS. So the computer lab itself, no more necessary. If once the license expires, it's gone. We will not renew anymore. We are shifting the entire uni to JSP. Why? Because number one, it's a lot more robust. I mean, it's not robust, it's a lot more intuitive, right? Because you can do new stuff on JSP that you can't do on SPSS. Number one. Number two, because JSP itself, it's second reason is free, right? It's you have to pay for it, right? I'm saving the uni about like 600,000 a year, right? And number three, yeah, you think it's cheap, all the stuff they give you expensive one, okay, it costs us money, okay, you think free one, all this sort of thing, right? And the third reason is because JSP, if you go to the JSP website itself, there are like 15 different manuals you can download for free, written by JSP researchers on every possible function in JSP. So if you want to know how to utilize JSP well, make sure the homepage of JSP's website is your homepage. Everything is there. Everything is there. Really, not everything. Like 98% of stuff is there. 2% of things you can do on JSP not there. But give it a few months, some nerd will put it up there. All right, because it's like that. I love JSP because the scholar community on JSP is so interactive. If you ever been, again, revealing how nerd I am. If you ever been to the forum of JSP and you ask a question, let's say for example you want to do an analysis, JSP got no button to click, and you're like, how do I do this on JSP? I can't find the button. You put on the forum, right? Within like one day, you will get a few replies from people who are experts in JSP telling you exactly how to code it into JSP or the button where to find it, right? It's super active on the community, right? I don't know why they're so happy. They're so like, ooh, like so nerdy. I'm like, even I'm a nerd, so I'm like, wow, you guys are too much, right? But yeah, they're like super interactive, right? So it's very useful. The manuals give you almost everything. The things that are not in the manual, go to the forum and it's free. Just sign up your student email account. Just say, hi, I'm a student from Malaysia, right? I'm doing GSP, I'm new to this. Can you teach me how to do this? They will answer you. Right? SPSS, everything you got to pay. Right? The textbooks you got to pay, the ND Fields textbook. You all know what's funny? The ironic thing is ND Fields SPS textbook, right? ND Fields wrote the same textbook for JASP, right? And in the foreword of the JASP textbook, ND Fields actually says he prefers JASP. So, yeah, right? So, if you're still at SPSS, change to JASP, a lot easier, right? And I think I can see the question here. Next question, I will say link to question number 19, right? Link to previous question. Go and read the JASP. Really very useful for self-learning. Go download the manual and read, okay?
Okay, there's a final question in the docs, which is there any way where we could run statistical analysis for qualitative?
Sorry, I shouldn't laugh. It's in the name, right? It's qualitative, right? So if it's qualitative and it's words, what stats you're talking about? You want to count how many words they say? Is it no lah? The fact if it's quali is quali lah. If it's so, some people will ask me, okay, Victor, what if my quali research is observational and I also see how many times they perform the behavior? Congratulations, it's mixed methods now. Because you're still looking at behavior, it's counting behavior. If you're counting something, it's quant. Right? The name is there, quantitative, numbers, qualitative is quality, is words, it's stories. Right? So if you're asking me, how do we do a stats analysis with these numbers on a story? There's no way lah. Right? Unless you're going to count the number of words, in which case it's still quant lah. Right? There's no way. So the beauty of quali, any people doing quali here? Right? The beauty of quali is you can throw every single stats book out as stats number out the window. Right? The only thing that matters, the only number I would say that matters in qual is a minimum sample size. And even then, G power can't tell you. It's literally rule of thumb, right? Rule of thumb, this guy says 5, that guy says 20, okay, 15. Literally, I'm not kidding you, right? Literally, I'm not kidding you. It's like that, right? One person says 5, Creswell says 25, 15, middle ground, right? Everybody is happy, right? That's the only number you care about. Everything else is just narratives and themes, right? Because how do I know? Because I do both qual and qual research. Then the beauty of qual is, there's literally no number one. It's just your own interpretation, completely you, right? Of course, you have to triangulate back with theory, with literature, etc. But if you hate numbers, right? If you really, really hate stats for some reason, quali, no numbers, zero, no analysis.
Thank you so much, Dr. Wei, for the first session of answering all the questions that we have prepared right now. And then actually we would like to shift the questions to the floor to see if there is any questions that you guys still have. Yes. And we will open up a Slido for you guys to scan if you have questions.
Oh. Okay, this one is it? Ooh, okay. Wait, if I present this, does it show? No, it doesn't. Let me just. Okay, is that it? Sorry. Okay, done.
Yeah, so anyone who is curious and you don't mind raising up your hand to straight ask, because time is precious. We only have like around 35 more minutes for today's discussion. Sorry, could you close it? Yeah, so we only have 20 minutes for questions. So if you guys have any question, you can straight away raise up your hand. But if you are shy, you can put in the Slido. We will still attend to them.
Okay, so just to answer your question, Jack, because I also wasn't sure. No, your forest regression is actually not OLS. Yeah, it's not. I thought it was. I thought it would borrow concepts. Actually, it's not. It's not OLS. But you don't teach you that in yeah. Okay. Joseph is very good at stats. Right? In fact, yeah, he's very good at stats. So you should check Joseph. Yeah. Okay, yeah.
So you know RCT randomized control trials.
Yeah.
Some people say it's very good, but then I hear a lot of criticism say no real world application.
Okay, why am I laughing? Because before I do that, who told you there's no real application? Whoever wrote that obviously has never been a consultant in his life, right? RCT is the thing that we use in consultancy, right? In real world applications, RCTs are the way we find the truth. So I'll give you an example. Mercedes-Benz, right? Mercedes-Benz for Formula One team, right? When they are testing, and the F1, if you don't know anything about the F1, F1 racing is like the peak, the pinnacle of really just testing and analysis. And they are amazing how they do it. Mercedes-Benz F1 team, actually, what they do is, you need to show the QR. Okay. Mercedes-Benz F1 team, the beauty of what they do is they do RCTs almost all the freaking time. Why? Because RCTs, random control trials, allows you to really remove every single other variable where possible. Now, I understand the criticism. Some people say RCTs in psychology don't really work, right? That's not true. Why? Because if you say, oh, our psychology is such a fuzzy subject, you cannot really separate individual things, right? You know, to the RCT, then you can never actually draw a conclusion in the first place, right? Even in behavioral science consulting, which I do, right? Behavioral consulting, RCTs are still very valuable because yes, we can't possibly remove every single factor, but you remove as many as you can. You just test that one. It's still going to be better than you don't remove anything at all. You understand? So RCTs, in fact, I'll always say, if you're a student, you're doing a thesis design or 105 or 107, etc., you should consider the framework of the RCT, right? Always have a randomized control trial because that's really how you find valid results in a sense. For anybody who says, yeah, it's not applicable in real life, because in real life you can't control for everything. I think they're missing the point of what the RCT is for. You're not meant to control everything, but you're meant to say with more confidence that this thing, under conditions that we've analyzed before, actually has an impact. Right?
Thank you so much for your question. We do have some questions from the floor. So firstly, people ask, what is Bayesian? Sorry if I pronounce it wrong.
Bayesian, B-A-Y-E.
Bayesian statistic.
Oh, okay. Do you mind if I switch my screen a bit?
Yes.
As I can show you something. So it's easier to see. Wait, okay, wait, let me just. Do I have it? Where is it? Where is it? Okay, sorry. If you're wondering what I'm doing, I'm trying to find my slide deck because I just did a session on Bayesian statistics for the uni not long ago. I'm trying to find where the freak is it, right? Where's it? Where's my slide deck? Okay, I might forget it. Okay, never mind. Okay, never mind. So before I answer the question, a few caveats. Number one, I'm not an expert in Bayesian statistics, right? I'm not. I have to confess that I'm not. I know frequencies, which is SPSS and JSP, right? That's frequencies analysis. Bayesian methods, I'm not an expert, right? I can tell you just some very fundamental differences between Bayesian and Bayesian analysis. Number one, Bayesian doesn't use p-values, right? We use BF, base factor, right? BF, so BF10, for example, right? But the difference between Bayesian statistics and SPSS is this. P-values, they tell you the percentage of something happening if the null hypothesis is true, right? If it's like the p-values are right. Base factors gives you how many times more likely is something to happen compared to the alternative value, right? So for example, let's say you use a Bayesian analysis, and JSP can actually use Bayesian analysis if you want to, if you're interested, right? And you get a BF10 of 3.5. So the BF10 is your P, so your BF10 equals to 3.5. What that thing is telling you is it is 3.5 times more likely for your alternative to be true compared to your null. That's Bayesian statistics, right? So the null hypothesis, frequencies SPSS, it rejects the null. Bayesian focuses on accepting the alternative, not rejecting the null. You understand? Right? So that's why people say Bayesian is more useful. Because you're not just rejecting the null, you're not just saying there's no effect, but you're saying there is. You're accepting the alternative hypothesis. You understand? So Bayesian methods are as of today, they are mostly used in machine learning, right? Algorithms, AI programming, machine learning, Bayesian methods. Number two, decision making, right? So when I work with, again, I'm not an expert in this, but when I work with consultants in the field, in corporate, decision making, sometimes they prefer Bayesian statistics compared to frequencies. Because you're saying, if I have this $6 million plan that I'm going to roll out this year, what is the chance of that being successful? That's the alternative compared to no effect at all. So they want to make sure that you have a higher confidence in your alternative. And that's why they prefer Bayesian, in a sense. That being said, I'm not an expert in Bayes analysis. So if you want to find out, read by yourself, ask Joseph. Yongjian, are you familiar with Bayesian statistics? Not really also. Yeah. Yes. So Bayesian, the beauty of Bayesian, thanks for bringing it up. The beauty of Bayesian is it allows for the input of prior knowledge. So if you have past studies, you have literature, you have whatever that proves or that supports a particular viewpoint, you can actually input that into your Bayesian as one of the factors for you to consider as well. Yeah. How you do that, I don't know. Honestly, I don't know. Right? But yeah, that's one thing I'm aware of as well.
So much for the question. Second question is, can I still produce a good paper when doing quali compared to quanti?
Of course. Qual is in no way inferior to quant. Qual is in no way inferior to quant. I will say, okay, my honest answer to you is this. Qual will really test your critical thinking as a researcher. I'm not saying quant won't. Quant will as well, right? How you operationally define your variables, how do you conceptually frame them in your framework, that's all critical thinking. Qual is even more than that. Because qual, you have the same thing, you have the operation definition, you have the conceptual framework, whatever. But in quant, you have the numbers. If the numbers say no, answer is no. Qual, there's no right or wrong. There's no yes or no. It entirely depends on how you are extracting your data, your coding cycles. Is it axial? Is it thematic? Is it radial? Is it whatever? All those different cycles you have, right? And what are the theoretical links you can draw between each particular theme and sub-theme. So I would say qual is harder to score, to be honest with you. Why? Because qual, you really have to have an intuitive grasp of your subject matter. Quant is a bit more straightforward. If it's P, confidence interval, etc., straightforward, right? But is qual papers shit papers? No, sorry. That's right. Is qual paper a bad paper? No, it's not. Right? I know some of the statisticians, those purists, they're like, qual based on time, or make up story only, who cares? Right? That's not true. It's not true at all. In fact, a majority of psychological theory is grounded theory, is qual. You start with qual, then you establish a theory, right? If you start with numbers, how to establish any theory? You have to ask first, right? So qual actually has a very important role to play. And in fact, what I'm quite sad about is I see most students don't do qual. Because they're like, too much work. Right? This calculator is a lot easier, right? But qual gives you a lot more exposure to psychology, gives you a lot more insights into personal phenomenon as well. And I think it's very interesting to do.
Another question is, if I use advanced sports analytics such as basketball advanced metrics for a correlational disease, would that become data science instead of psychology?
Psychology is data science. When you analyze things, it is data science, right? Whether or not it's psychology depends on what are the psychological implications. But if you're measuring, as in how high the athlete can jump, that's not psychology, or that's physiology or yeah. If you're measuring, unless you're telling me self-esteem is linked to how high you can jump, right? High self-esteem jump higher, then okay, then maybe psychological, right? But otherwise, if you're doing this basketball analysis, I'm assuming you're power of the athletes, whatever accuracy of the shots. What are you talking about? Give me the example. I don't know. But if you're measuring really just pure biometrics, right, then it's not psychology anymore. Data science is data science. It doesn't matter whether it's psychology or not. But what's the context that you're measuring?
Yeah, maybe if you are here and you are asking this question and you wanted to, back us up a little bit more of the content, we can pass you the mic. Yeah. Actually, we don't have any questions so far. We have answered all. So once again, we open up the floor. Is there any final say? Or else I don't mind passing to Victor to yet for the final 30 minutes.
Interesting. Okay. So let's talk EFA. Okay, let's talk EFAs. Okay, no, since CFA, what we talk about. So EFAs, okay, so difference again, background, EFA and CFA. EFA is exploratory factor analysis, CFA is confirmatory factor analysis. So like the name suggests, EFA means you're exploring, you want to see how many factors are there, right? CFA is you're confirming that you got these 3 factors, are they actually 3 factors or are they actually more factors? So let's talk about CFA first, right? In non-psychometrics, right? Which is what I do, right? So the thing that I feel quite sad is people always say, oh, EFA, CFA is only for psychometrics. No, it's not. Right? I in my work with corporate clients, we do EFAs and CFAs all the time, right? They don't know it's an EFA or a CFA. All they know is Victor given the answer, right? But what Victor is doing is an EFA and a CFA, right? So how do we use it in corporate practice? Okay. For example, let's say a CEO of, I can't say their name because we signed an NDA with them. So CEO of tech firm, right? Technology firm CEO comes to me and says, Victor, I got this data set with my what? I want to see, does this actually predict my employee performance? Right. So as a consultant, I say, yeah, fine, I can do the analysis for you. Right. I want a CFA. So you have different metrics of that he's measured, and you have the final outcome of his DV, his employee performance. And his employee performance is operationally defined in X way, like in one particular way. Right. So we have the DV outcome, right? Or whether we have the DV already, and then we have the different employee metrics itself. So my job as a researcher, as a data scientist, as a data analyst, is to actually see the 3 factors that he thinks actually predicts employee outcome. Right? It's actually somewhat related to employer outcome. Does it actually predict in the first place? Does it actually account for that in the first place? Right? Now you could do a regression analysis because you already have the 3 things, right? But sometimes some companies don't have that yet. They haven't collected it yet in that sense. They haven't collected the data yet in a sense. So you're just trying to confirm for his particular situation itself, right? What are the factors that make up performance in employees? And that's when you run the CFA, right? Yes. So he hasn't collected it. So my job as a consultant is to go to this company and collect the relevant data. And then I run the CFA. Right? But that's if he already defines there are going to be 3 factors. He thinks there are going to be 3 factors. Yeah. But if he doesn't, EFAs, see how many possible factors there are?
Question, right? When you said that for EFA and CFA, we also need to consider the theoretical evidence behind it. So does that mean not only can take the data from the companies, you also need to do some literature to
yes. Yes, and this I will say is the key difference between academic and corporate. Academic, your literature review is super important, right? And it's really very important because however many factors you have, what the factors actually going to be is all in the review. In corporate, sometimes there's no literature. There are adjacent literatures. So for example, like this company itself, where got literature? Don't have them, but there are adjacent literatures means there are studies done on other similar tech firms, similar sized firms, similar country firms, similar locality firms, similar structure firms. So those are adjacent research. They can give you a hint, an idea of what you're going to find, but they are not the same as academic research, right? And honestly, that's the biggest problem between, a bit off topic here, but that's the biggest problem between academics and practitioners. Most people who are very good at stats in academics fail in corporate. Why? Because they are so used to it has to be this rigorous. In the corporate field, it's very fuzzy. There's no such thing as such rigorous. You have to be very intuitive in how you do it, right? And that's why I see some people who are damn good at stats, but you ask them to be consultants, they will die of stress because they cannot deal with that fuzziness of the problem itself.
So what questions and what do we collect?
Yeah, so you see this a lot. In junior consultants, they go in there and they're like, I collect everything. What time you go to work, what time you finish, what's your weight, what's your body, everything, and you collect every single metric. I would say it counts two things. One, it counts from your homework that you've done. So again, I said adjacent research, things that you know about the industry, etc. Number two, it also counts with experience. You've been in the industry, like for me, like I've been in the industry like 10 years. You know, you more or less know what are going to be the similar key metrics that most companies will have to be aware of, in a sense, right? So that's where your experience and intuition comes in. Yeah. So the in psychology, it's actually very intuitive. And I know when I say this, some of the lecturers will have a heart attack hearing this, but it's true. In psychology, in applied psychology, it's very intuitive. It's not just all theoretical, all structured, all rigorous. In theoretical psychology, yes. In applied psych, which is my field, is extremely intuitive. Because you have to sometimes follow your gut feeling and go, I think this will probably mean something. And you just test and you see lah. If it doesn't mean anything, fine. But you don't leave that stone unturned in a sense. Sometimes we have actually come across breakthroughs in companies where you have tested for one variable that every literature says has no impact whatsoever. But that one researcher is like, I think God lah. And he tested it and then really got, right? And that was the entire breakthrough of the company itself. Right? So give one example, right? It's being recorded here. Okay. One example is, I just won't say the company name. Okay, so employee morale very low, right? And a typical IO will say, employee morale is pay, is autonomy, flexibility, blah, 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 right? What we realized in that particular case was not an IO situation. It was the personal branding of the boss. So for example, the boss of the company itself, right? I won't say the gender, right? They were looked up to by a lot of the staff as a moral exemplar. The staff found out that the boss was having an affair. The moral exemplar fell. Employee morale fell. Which IO theory will tell you that? None, right? But the consultant who was in there understood. It's like, could it be related? Because if the staff all idolize the boss and they find that the boss is having an affair, how would that impact on their work performance? Right? So ultimately, the consultant tested for that, right? Your view of your boss. And he realized that there was a very, very clear, overwhelming clarity that, hey, that's why performance has dropped recently, because they've lost morale, because they've lost confidence in who the boss is, and what the boss stands for. And that's why they're like, no, screw this. I want to help this immoral person. Right? No IO psychology theory will tell you that. If you're a theorist, psychology theorist, you will never find the answer. If you're applied and you're intuitive enough, you're asking these kind of questions, you might. Right? Very, very fun enough. Sometimes you stumble upon all this kind of dramas and you're like, whoa, what in the world is happening? Right? So yeah.
Yeah, because now you mentioned based on experience, like then you can know like roughly what.
That's one example. Like you are in the industry long enough, you know the personal branding of the boss has some role to play on. As an example, like from experience, yeah.
Question here, because I feel like a lot of students, when we are doing thesis, right, I think people struggle to find research gap. And I just wonder, based on your experience, what area do you think is psychology recently? I don't know if it's a trend or if it's an area that people don't really go and touch into, or do you notice in any areas in specific that actually require more researcher to look into?
I'm going to give you the most cliche answer in the world, but there is a reason I'm giving you the answer. And it's AI. That is the most bloody cliche answer in the world. Even I say it, so I'm like cringing at saying that. But I'll give you an example that I really hope either our master students or one of you actually do it. If you do it, I'll be super impressed, right? And it's AI, but not AI as you see it. Most people think, oh, AI, how does it link to psychological ownership? How does it link to self-esteem? How does it link to diligence, hard work, etc.? All those different things, right? Or they talk about AI in terms of, can it be used for counseling? Can it be used for whatever assessment? The one thing that I've realized, and I have to admit this, again, this is pure intuition. There's no research that I've done before. It's just my intuition that comes from my experience and my experience of being a father is this. When you look at AI models, you realize a majority of AI models are dumb, right? And when I say dumb, I mean, they don't have the relevant life experience to draw from, they don't have whatever, right? And why do I see that? Because I realize most of the AI, the way they process and analyze data, the way they think, the framework, the structure, etc., is like my 6-year-old son, right? Or it's like my 6-year-old son in some ways, or like my 2-year-old boy in some ways. You have to really prompt them, give them further guidance, whatever, what they should think, what they should say, whatever, and then they can process information, right? So I'm thinking, one of the things that I'm thinking of is, in the same way as we use applied behavioral analysis, ABA, to help children with autism learn social skills, learn social cues, learn explore behaviors, whatever. AI as a counselor is horrible because they got no social skills. They got no social behavior, whatever. Is it possible to use ABA on AI? You're treating the AI like an autistic kid, in a sense, right? And you're just using ABA as a framework to develop an AI that can actually do counseling work. I think that's interesting because if you do something like that and your model does work and your AI is actually trained to pick up on social cues, imagine how powerful that will be, right? You got an AI model that you've trained using ABA therapy that can actually respond to emotional cues, and that's amazing because most AI cannot. They are a bit dumb in that sense, right? So the AI's intelligence is data processing. They can process huge amounts of data faster than you can, but they can't process social cues and emotions. But in the same way, a kid with autism, the brain is also very capable of processing data. The kid just can't understand social cues. So if ABA works for the kid, will ABA work for the AI? Right? That's honestly one of the things that I've been thinking about. I'm just running an analysis before, like just to see, just you create an AI persona, an AI model, right? And you just train the shit out of it. Sorry, just train it a lot with ABA, and you see how it happens. You see how does it respond.
Right. Like, even if you were to train the AI model, how can we tell that they really understand the social cue or they are just merely doing it? Like how like recently the ChatGPT was where you can sort of want him to talk to you in a certain way. How do we know and can tell he really understands the social cue?
It's the same thing as how you would test a child with autism. Their assessments, their outcomes, you can observe them. You use the same kind of test, just adapted for the computer.
Say for the wouldn't people criticize that it's like deterring from psychology?
I would say it's not. Okay, two questions are. Does it differ from psychology? No, because your psychological function is there. Your ABA therapy is a psychological function, right? So that's the psychology part. Rigor. Let's talk about rigor. I think if you're going to be in applied psychology like mine, you have to accept that the standards of rigor are a lot less. I'm not saying we have no standard at all, but you have to accept that there is applied psych is a very fuzzy field. So if you're going to be like, oh, it has to be completely rigorous, there's no way to question it, or no, there's no such thing. In applied psychology, there's always going to be critiques, right? How do we deal with the critiques? Through the results. If it works, it works. I'm a bit biased at this. I'm a bit biased because I am an applied psychologist, right? So I don't really have a lot of patience for like people who are purely theoretical, right? But yeah, otherwise I sort of a bit biased, right? So I have to admit that.
Okay, just a reminder that we have like 10 more minutes to really for the last call of question. So if you have burning questions in your heart, you should try to ask because it's very rare to get Dr. Victor to come here, even though he's very busy and everything. So please don't miss the chance. Last call. Do you want to say something? Okay.
I believe you said that like because I'm doing qualitative research and I feel like the application of theory is very vague, like the theoretical framework part.
Should I say that again? You're doing what?
Yeah, I'm doing qualitative.
Qualitative. Okay. Application of theory is vague.
Yes.
What do you mean by that?
A theory, but then kind of like I'm trained in quantitative way already. So I'm looking at it, it's like, okay, there's this factor plus another factor, so that there's outcome. So I'm wondering like how do I apply a theory in a qualitative way? So how, because the theory I found is like, okay, it's an axis, two axes, and then there's 4 different outcomes. But for my qualitative, I want to analyze the outcomes only. So how do I like I'm stuck on that.
Okay, so instead of answering your question, why don't I give you a different perspective of how a different paper is written, and then you can see how the researcher actually used the theory as a framework, right? So very similar to quant, you have a theoretical framework that explains quant, you have a theoretical framework that tells you how A is linked to B, right? The only difference in qual is that there is no variable per se. So you can't say, oh, it explains how A is linked to B, right? So let's say, for example, let's say I'm doing a qual research, qual, right? And I'm analyzing people's workplace. Okay, so because I'm a workplace researcher, so let's do this workplace. And I want to say, okay, look, so there is a particular theory in the workplace, IO, very established theory called the JCM, right? The job creditors model. And the JCM basically says every single job, you have 5 different aspects. You have skill variety, task and identity, task significance, autonomy, feedback, right? I'm going very fast, it's not important. But you have just 5 jobs, 5 different aspects that makes a job meaningful. And if a job is meaningful, if they work harder, the company earns more money, everybody wins, right? Very simple. You can't do a qual research and say, so you're performing this one, is it because of your job task and identity? Is it because of your skill variety? You can't, because you don't have the data. There's no numbers there. But what you can do is, you know these 5 variables exist. You're asking them about their job experience. So how is it like working for Victor Ghost and Riran Berha? Tell me your normal day. And you say, okay, my normal day is I wake up, I go to work, and then Victor scolds me every morning, right? But at the same time, Victor buys me lunch every single day, right? So all the time, when I work for Victor Ghost company, you know, I got this, I every day I got new products to do, every day I do this sort of things. So you have all these narratives, all these stories, and you're extracting data from those stories, and you're saying, okay, look, so these are things that the participant has said is important. Victor buys him lunch every day, one thing. Victor scolds him every morning. Victor, whatever. So you're putting all these things. These are units of meaning. These are important things that the person is saying, right? Now your job, again, I say it's a course more difficult to do. Your job as the researcher is to say, so Victor scolds him every morning, right? But at the same time, the person says not bad. He actually likes the scolding because when he gets scolded, he feels that he knows what to do. So the scolding, could it be linked to feedback in the theory itself? Right? And this guy also said, you know, one of the things that he loves working with Victor is because, you know, he always feels that he's achieving something great because, you know, all the big projects he's doing, Victor just shows him he just do. So could that be linked to task significance? And at the same time, because he's doing something new, he's learning something new, could it also be linked to skill variety? So you see how the theory, the framework allows you to analyze your data. You're not saying this predicts that, because that's quant. But in a qual, your theory gives you the lens that you're looking through. Because if the theory didn't have, let's say, for example, feedback as a factor, then you got no feedback lens. In which case, Victor scolding the staff means nothing. But because there is a feedback aspect, and you look through the feedback aspect, you can see Victor scolding the staff as feedback. So that's the function of your theoretical framework in your qual analysis, you understand? It gives you the frame. That's why it's called a framework. Just that it's framed differently. In quant, it tells you what is linked to what. In qual, it's the lens you look through. It's your theoretical lens. Does that answer your question? Yes. This gives you some idea on how to do your qual?
Yeah. Definitely need to do more research. Thank you so much.
Anyone got a question? I want to ask a question. Sorry, I got a lot of questions. Peter, let's say because I'm doing my study, I want to be it's very based on intuition, where the context is
wait. I said applied psych as intuitive.
Yeah.
That doesn't give you license to be intuitive. Put it this way, I mean, in a more straightforward way, you're not qualified yet to do the intuition study. You have to show your homework. Yeah.
It's like how driving is somewhat automated now, like Teslas and everything, and then drive the cars have the trail function, you can trail the car in front.
Yeah.
So I plan to add on a cognitive task, so a control done the task, and then if doing an automatic and also control done the task together, according to working memory done here, it can increase working memory.
How are you going to apply it? You can't do this on the road. People will die.
VR.
Meaning what? Meaning you put it in the VR?
Yeah, VR and service.
Okay, and then what are you going to do? Operationalize it for me. So you're assuming that if the car is automated, they can do mental rotation better.
Semi-automated.
They can do more mental rotations.
They have and doing the automatic task that increase working memory.
What do you mean by increase working memory?
So that improves their working memory.
Again, what do you mean by that? What is your out? Is that your DV?
Yeah.
How are you going to measure that? The better they do, the more working memory they have. Okay, so can I be very honest with my response to you? Right?
Yes.
What is the difference between that and cognitive load? Yeah, then why are you doing it? See, the idea is cognitive load is a very established concept already. If my working memory is already filled in with a lot of different tasks to do, cognitive load is high, I can't focus on something else. In which case, you're just saying I'm reducing cognitive load by giving you a partially controlled car. Of course, the answer is going to be yes, I can do more. Because cognitive load is there. The concept of cognitive load already explains your entire study. Why are we doing it?
It's more like
yeah, I understand. There are smart cars. My car can drive itself also. I understand. But that being said, if cognitive load already explains that already, you're just trying to reinvent the wheel. But you already have a wheel.
So the application is
I will say your research gap itself is problematic because what's your gap? I mean, if I were your co-marker, or you touch wood, I'm your examiner, and I asked you this question, you can't answer immediately off the top of your head, you're dead already. You understand? Right? So it's an interesting thing. I mean, I would say the cars, automated cars nowadays, what does it say? What does it do? I would say maybe a more interesting thing will be attention blindness. Right? Why? Because automated cars, we subcontract the attention to our car systems. Does it actually mean that as a driver, sometimes we may not notice things that we should actually still be noticing? A car across the road, you should see it, but you don't see it because you trust your car.
Yeah.
That could be something interesting. Cognitive load, I think, is already very well structured and explained already. Right? Sorry, Ami, if I pop your bubble.
No,
I mean,
it's okay.
yeah.
Yeah, so one last question from the floor. If no, we are going to wrap it up. So I'm going to call all once. Okay. I mean, we're gonna wrap up. Okay, we see if still got any question from the floor. On the side door. Okay, no. Anything you want to, any last word you want to give us?
Thanks for coming. Bye-bye. Yeah, what I want to say. Okay, to be honest, for those of you who are online and those of you who are here, I appreciate it. I appreciate that you took time out of your day to come and listen, come and learn, ask questions a bit more. I hope it was useful for you, right? But I appreciate it. And for me, I feel that it tells me a lot about your priorities as well, and what you want to do. Because no one is paying you to be here, unless she's paying you, in which case you tell me, because I just want to get paid, right? But otherwise, I think the fact that you come here to take the time out of the day to learn, even if you, because there was no confirmation you will learn something. You could come here and just waste 2 hours of your time if I talk nonsense. But the fact that you're willing to take that risk and because you come and learn anyway, see you can learn, I think that's very good of all you. So you should deserve a pat on the back, right? Well done, good job, right? Proud of yourself, right? Yeah. Other than that, okay, thank you, bye-bye. See you.